in Australia and New Zealand. Just a brief agenda, and I'm hoping you'll be a little bit more knowledgeable today about the region that we live in down here, what we have to offer, and some information about Mobius Medical and what we do. Before I talk to you about clinical research, I thought I could open with some interesting trivia about Australia, also known as the Crocodile Dundee country. Australia is a continent found between the South Pacific and the Indian Oceans. It's about the sixth largest country in the world by area and is sometimes dubbed Earth's largest island and smallest continent. The indigenous people of Australia are some of the longest living humans on the planet, having been here for over 40,000 years. First discovered by the Dutch in the 1600s, Australia saw its first fleet of British claim the eastern seaboard in 1788, and white settlement, as infamous probably as Crocodile Dundee himself, began largely with colonies of convicts. Australia boasts some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, with picture postcard white sand and crystal waters. Around 45% of Australia, though, its red centre, is completely uninhabited desert. Something we're not so proud of in Australia is being a very overweight nation, but we're fat and fit, and around 70% of us participate in some kind of regular sport. Australia is the second wealthiest nation in the world per capita after Switzerland, with the highest concentration of wealthy people and 21 consecutive years of GDP growth, currently tracking at around about 10% per annum. We're the fourth largest wine producer, and we churn out around 750 million litres of wine a year. So this is Sydney. This is where I'm talking to you from right now. Sydney is a very advanced market economy, larger than countries such as Denmark, Singapore and Hong Kong. Just a couple of slides showing the relative size of Australia to the US and Europe. Quite remarkably, we only have a handful of major cities and we're about the 1/14 the population of the US. This is just us over Europe. So over the past couple of decades, Australia and New Zealand have developed a solid reputation in the field of medical research. Not only do many key global international opinion leaders hail from this region, we also boast many excellent large teaching hospitals, research centres of excellence and facilities with state-of-the-art diagnostic and therapeutic equipment. We're also entirely English-speaking, which when we compare to our counterparts in Asia and in Europe, I think is a major advantage. As you're probably aware, international standards of conduct for clinical trials provide a benchmark of clinical research quality that can be relied upon throughout the world. Under the Therapeutic Goods Act and associated regulations here, ICH-GCP is mandatory for all Australian clinical trials involving unapproved medicines or medical devices. So in other words, not to comply with GCP in a clinical trial setting in Australia is actually against the law. I expect many startup companies come to Australia and New Zealand to collect their first clinical data due to the fact that we don't have a regulatory approval structure for clinical trials. The TGA defers responsibility for reviewing and approving clinical trials to the institution's ethics committees, and so simply employs a clinical trial notification scheme to permit the legal supply of the unapproved product. The system is very similar to FDA's exemption for low-risk devices. This slide is just for your information. There are another 3 mechanisms for the legal supply of unapproved medical devices and pharmaceuticals in Australia under TGA law. The CTX scheme is similar to an IDE, where TGA reviews and approves an application. This can take 6 to 9 and even 12 months. To my knowledge, we've never had to use the CTX scheme in Australia to date for devices. The Special Access Scheme allows doctors to use a novel device or drug in an emergency if they believe it to be in the best interest of the patient. The SAS form is sent to TGA advising of the treatment, often retrospectively. Lastly, on occasion, TGA will allow a physician to use an unapproved therapeutic good by way of prescription only, which is arranged between the two parties under special conditions. In July this year, TGA launched an online system allowing sponsors to digitally sign the online notification form, declaring to TGA that all the requirements have been met, including ethics approval and governance or legal approval at the institution level. Until recently, 4 parties needed to sign a paper-based form, and that delayed the process needlessly. So we're really grateful to TGA for launching this online system. Mobius Medical acts as the Australian legal sponsor for the majority of our overseas clients who don't have an Australian legal entity. As a result, Mobius can seamlessly process the regulatory notification step for our clients, basically now with one click. This is just a screenshot of the TGA portal where sponsors digitally notify TGA of the site details for each protocol. This is just a slide about New Zealand. So the process is even more straightforward over there because the New Zealand regulatory authority, MedSafe, don't even expect a notification. Essentially, HREC approval, Hospital Research Ethics Committee approval and governance approvals of the legal documents is all that's required. Don't you just love an acronym? So in clinical research, as you know, we have an awful lot of them. Institutional review boards, independent ethics committees, human research ethics committees, all the same thing. So let's have a look at the HRECs in Australia and New Zealand. It's quite a similar setup between the two, so I'll really talk about both countries in one. So in both countries in recent years, we've adopted a single ethics review process known as SERP, where a lead site submits for all sites similar to a central IRB set up in the US. Under a SERP, we usually obtain full approval for the lead site within about 6 weeks. The satellite sites under that SERP then, they forward the lead approval along with their site-specific consents, etc., and their own legal documents to their governance department, and local approval is granted within a week or 2 following the ethics approval. Just an important note here, all ethics committees must be constituted according to the National Health and Medical Research Council, which is our government body, and they must be able to provide evidence of this to us for our trial master file. Mobius has found that using a private Human Research Ethics Committee, trials can actually be initiated within a much shorter time frame, even down to a month of protocol submission. As I said in the last slide, in the public setting, this is more like 2 to 3 months. But the private ethics committee that's set up here called Bellbury has a fully web-based application process and an incredibly fast turnaround in times for correspondence. Just for example, I've known a simple protocol amendment or an administrative revision to, say, a consent form to be reviewed and approved within 24 hours by Bellbury. This slide just shows you basically a chart of the process that Mobius undergoes for a new project. So just note that this chart assumes that the sites have been selected by the client, which is often the case, and so that step's been left out. So first thing we do is sign a project agreement with the client, which outlines the tasks that the client would like Mobius to undertake for them. Usually we've received a draft protocol and hopefully a final protocol by now, and we sometimes help Australianize the global protocol for our client. We would book the ethics committee meeting at the same time that we're reviewing the protocol, creating the patient information and consent form, etc. And similarly, we're also drafting legal documents and obtaining clinical trial insurance if we need to for the client. Once that step's in place, the submission package goes off to the ethics committee. At the same time, Mobius can be designing CRFs, building our own EDC for our client, and developing the data management plan. The clinical team might be creating the trial master file, writing the monitoring plan, and determining the logistics and resources for running the clinical trial. Essentially, once we've got ethics committee approval and then the research governance approval at the local level, we can notify TGA with that seamless online declaration, and initiation of the site can be conducted. Just a few slides here showing real-life data on timelines to site initiation for you. So the first one is in Australia. This was a pivotal cardiac valve trial, and this was over the Christmas period. So essentially, we still, even throughout the Christmas period, got to site initiation visit within the 3-month mark. First in human device trial here, quite quickly. Again, cardiac valve trial is approved just over 2 months and initiated a month later, just so that the client could come to Australia and attend the first cases. This is a recent one in Australia again, spinal implant in the public hospital setting. So you can see that we achieved ethics approval within 2 months, and again the initiation visit was just delayed after that, purely out of logistics for patients and training by the client. A couple of examples from New Zealand. It's even faster over there actually. So this is an AV fistula first in human trial, and site was initiated in only 6 weeks from submission to the initiation visit date. This is a tibial stent first in human trial, again only 6 weeks, and we had to contend with Easter, so that was quite successful. So just a few slides now on the Australian government's initiatives in terms of ensuring we've got a good product to offer overseas companies who do want to come down to Australia to conduct their clinical trials. So the Australian government employs entire departments to actively seek ways to continually improve efficiency, reduce the processes, and increase the chances of successfully initiating and running trials through the NHMRC, which is that government body I was talking about. So one such effort is the Clinical Trials Ready initiative, where sites who are ready, willing and able to carry out high quality trials in an efficient manner are recognised. Mobius is really excited to track the progress of this scheme and recommend such centres to our clients in order to facilitate even faster times to site initiation. As I explained earlier, once we've jumped the ethics committee hurdle, the next stage is research governance approval of the clinical trial agreement, budget, insurance policy, etc. Sometimes it can cause our clients a great deal of frustration waiting for these documents to be signed off once ethics approval is granted. So this initiative by the Australian government is applauded by us. So this clinical trials jurisdictional working group, this group's working to identify and implement actions that will enable a consistent national approach to a multi-jurisdictional clinical trial setting within Australia, essentially with the intention of enhancing Australia's ability to attract national and international clinical trials. This initiative here is one to create a standardised table of costs for clinical trials, again, so that there's no delays in companies and clinical sites actually determining what budgets are. It'll be standardised. Public consultation site visits are pretty much complete now by this group. The final report and a standardised table of costs is currently being developed. This last initiative by the government, the NHMRC, the National Health and Medical Research Council, has engaged consultants to advise on the feasibility of and the framework, criteria and processes for credentialing a small number of national clinical trial ethics committees. Again, this will create a lot of noise, I think, in the Australian clinical trials space, because as I said earlier, you know, the major hurdle for us to jump through is ethics committee approval. We don't have that notification, that regulatory approval stage. We've only got notification, so anything we can do to speed up the approval stage through the ethics committee is obviously going to put us in really good stead to get you initiated and get some clinical data. Just one slide here on the Australian Research and Development Tax Incentive. So this is for companies who are willing to spend their R&D money in Australia to solve problems. Tax offsets of up to around 45% can actually be claimed for eligible companies under this initiative. There's quite a lot of information on this initiative, and it's changing all the time. I might even be out of date with this particular slide, but the website there, which is up to date, will provide more information if you are interested in reading about this. So Australia and New Zealand, as I said earlier, we're only 1/14 the size of the US in population. So essentially, do we have the numbers? Look, we really do. In terms of our patients, they're quite well educated and knowledgeable about the health system, its limitations, and then the availability of new treatments through clinical trials. The numerous government and private clinical trials registries that people search through to see if they're eligible for a new treatment or therapy. So quite often, depending on the trial, you know, we're not going out looking for patients, they're coming looking for the trial. Unlike some European countries too, Aussies generally don't consider themselves as guinea pigs in the clinical trial environment. And if they're offered or go out looking for a clinical trial, it's considered really quite a positive thing here. Pretty much all of our sites have e-medical records, of course, that investigators can now use as resources to identify eligible patients for certain treatments. Clinical trial participants in general are very compliant also, in my experience. They're quite wonderfully altruistic and seem to understand that if they don't turn up for their follow-up visits or don't fill out their quality of life questionnaire, or don't bring back their drug returns and things like this, that the trial results will actually suffer and that the new device, medicine, or whatever could be in jeopardy. So importantly for data acceptance as well, the treatment regimens, hospital versus day case procedures, these sorts of things are quite similar in Australia and New Zealand to our Northern Hemisphere counterparts. Okay, so on to the drier stuff. Let's have a look at the legal considerations. Thanks to two industry bodies here in Australia called Medicines Australia and the Medical Technology Association of Australia, we've now developed a robust set of standard legal templates which are wholly acceptable to the vast majority of US companies. This means there are no delays in the legal review of documents, just so long as these templates are employed. There is a section at the end of both the Medicines Australia and the MTAA clinical trial agreement where special conditions can be written so that if, for example, the template wording is not suitable, then the special condition at the end of the clinical trial agreement template can be edited, and that way the legal review of the document at the Research Governance Office again is quite quick because they know you haven't changed the template. All they've got to do is review and approve the special conditions that are set out at the end. Also, just on that point, insurance and indemnity. So Mobius Medical has a broker that we can obtain very robust insurance policies that are acceptable here. In certain areas of Australia, we need $20 million worth of cover, so many insurance companies find that, or brokers find that unusual, but we're used to it. So our broker can find really good, robust insurance policies to deal with this. The indemnity that we then supply legally to the sites and to the ethics committee, Mobius, acting as legal sponsor, can indemnify the sites on our client's behalf. So sometimes small's good. Like I said earlier, we're a massive country, but we're a small place to conduct business. What we don't really compete well in is those sort of large 5,000 patient phase 3 trials. We just don't have the patient numbers to support big pharma trials like that as a region. However, we do contribute to global phase 3 trials quite successfully, often contributing, pretty comparably site for site. The device trials, though, with high-risk procedures, needing the best in the field to carry out those sorts of procedures, we compete very, very well. In my experience, there are just a handful of key players that our clients want to work with down here, and as a result, we've got very strong relationships with those sites and those investigators. In fact, I've got most of the key opinion leaders in many therapeutic areas, in my phone that I can call night and day if necessary. In the Australian and New Zealand clinical trials environment, I think the 80-20 rule applies. I guesstimate that around 80% of our work is carried out in around 20% of the institutions down here. There are really only a handful of hospitals in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth and Auckland that do the vast majority of the device trials. And as I said earlier, with knowledge of the key players and have developed over the last 10 odd years very strong networks in almost all therapeutic areas. Just a little bit about Mobius Medical then. So Mobius was founded by myself and my partner Stefan Chinesky when we worked together at an Australian left ventricular assist device company called Ventricore, which is the picture there of the device. So we realised when we were working with these guys that there was a major gap in the Australian CRO space for device expertise and clinical research services for these smaller companies coming to Australia and New Zealand for pilot and first-in-human trials. By being small but having quite rigorous procedures developed over the many years that we've been in the clinical trial space, we feel we provide a highly flexible and expeditious service for our clients. We understand that initial clinical data are crucial, but often what was intended on paper doesn't always pan out as our clients expected. And as a result, I think we're flexible and we're always there for our clients. We understand at Mobius that product design is an ever-changing beast, and I believe we're able to change and adapt the clinical strategy very fluidly with our clients. As I said earlier, we also act as local sponsor for a number of our clients because to conduct a trial in Australia, there has to be an Australian legal entity acting as the indemnifying party. So we take care of those clinical trial agreements, contracts, indemnity, local clinical trial insurance policies, etc. Just on that last point, I think the biggest indicator for us that we're doing things right in the last 8 odd years is that we've got very, very many returning clients. In fact, one of our clients we're on our 7th project for now, which we're delighted about. So between the staff at Mobius Medical, we've got experience in many therapeutic areas. Some of them are listed here. Just a little bit more about the CRO sort of environment. I think great relationships between clients and CROs are vital, especially in early research, just due to the ever-changing nature of the projects. Some trials start when R&D is still completing the last runs of testing. This is often results in changes to be made to protocol design or even the device design. A CRO, I think, with a solid QMS is important, but there can be processes that comply with GCP without requiring impossible caveats to ensure compliance. And I think Mobius Medical have definitely developed a QMS that works. I think the study manager in the CRO needs to be able to think on their feet and act in the best interest of the client at all times. I think given that Stefan and I own the company, it's obviously in our best vested interest to be available to our client basically 24/7. And given the time differences, usually the Australian CRO is directing investigators autonomously whilst our clients are tucked up in bed. So I think this level of confidence in the CRO is super important, especially in first-in-human or early research. So I'd like to bring this talk to a close by sharing our mission statement with you. And I think we all need to remember why we're all in this amazing industry. And I hope our mission statement essentially says that. So I'll just let you read that slide. So thank you so much for listening to me this morning. I'm happy to now address a few questions. If I don't get to your question, I will respond by email, but I'll just take a minute or two now to have a read of some of the questions that have come through. Just bear with me for 2 minutes.